Mike Morgan. I'm the chair of APA DC, and APA's mission is to advocate, educate, and elevate the professional photographic community. Just want to mention, so advocacy for the industry is a big part of what we do, and there's only a few trade organizations that are collectively fighting for the rights of photographers. So if you're not a member, would encourage you to join and support the industry that's supporting you. You can reach out to us at membership@apadc.com. Sam's our membership chairs on the call here. So Sam, maybe you can put your email address in the chat. That'd be great. We have a discount code DC1 for 20 that will get you $20 off the new membership. And then just wanted to quickly mention our upcoming events. We've got an in-person happy hour on September 28th. That's at Sonny's Pizza on Georgia Avenue in DC, and it's an all-ages venue. So it's an awesome outdoor pizza garden and great food and drinks. So hope you can join us for that. And then on October 12th, we've got Andrea Stern and Renee Vespi from Ask Stern Rep. They're going to be presenting Prepping Your Portfolio, Strategies in the Age of Instagram. It's going to be a great lead-in for our fall portfolio reviews that are on November 1st and 2nd. So hope you'll join us for that as well. Okay, and we'll go ahead and get started here with our speaker, Clark Vandergrift. Clark's been an accomplished stills photographer in the Baltimore area who transitioned into motion projects, and most recently that culminated in serving as a cinematographer for a feature film, Road to Galena, that's in the theaters right now. And we'll go ahead and let you take it away.
All right. Thanks, Mike. I think a lot of people might be interested in how I came to be the cinematographer, and it's kind of an interesting topic for me to think about too, because I as I was telling Mike, I kind of stepped in it a little bit. It's not like I took a traditional route where I went to film school and then started working on a film crew as a first AC or a PA, and then working up from there. Literally, probably like a lot of people, when the Canon 5D Mark II came out, what was that, 10, 12, 14 years ago, I thought, wow, this is really cool. You can shoot video, HD video on a DSLR, and I picked that up and started learning as much as I could about it. And it's amazing the resources that are out there online. And I literally tried to piece together everything I could from editing, shooting, lighting, anything that I could learn about the film industry. And I started just creating little self-assigned projects. And then I would put them out there and market myself with that and lead with that. And then got to a point where I started shooting short films and entering them into film festivals. And then I'm doing commercial work. In fact, the way that I got to become the cinematographer on the Road to Galena was through a commercial project. I was doing a campaign for the FBI, and I had hired a location scout to help us come up with some crime scene locations. And he's also transitioning into full-on production work. He's been in the industry for 20 years. But Eric Bannett connected me after the project. He said, "This is amazing what you did with what you had." And a lot of the transition from a stills photographer into the film world does tend to, in my opinion, seems to involve a lot of one-man band stuff, and then slowly getting bigger and bigger crews and working into a full-fledged crew. And this was in the height of COVID when we did this project, and I think we only had about 15 people on the crew for this. He said, "I would love to introduce you to this writer-director." And the connection was made, and then we began shooting a bunch of B-roll, and we were planning on shooting the film starting in the fall of 2020, but COVID really put the kibosh on that. But it gave us an opportunity to continue to shoot a lot of B-roll for, the story takes place over the course of 20 years. And it gave us a great opportunity to shoot the locations in all different seasons, and then move into full on principal photography in the spring of 2021. But as far as the way that I got into it, I feel like I really just took a very untraditional route, and it kind of started doing video and doing some directing and some DP work. And it's all about the connections. I made a lot of connections visiting film festivals when I would enter the competitions there, and it's all about the connections and the after parties at the film festivals, and you can meet all kinds of people that are like-minded, and it's always good if you show up with a script in your back pocket and you can start talking right then and there. But yeah, truly, with even in the still photography industry, in any business, it's really about connections and who you know. As far as what would you like to talk about, Mike? Should I go into a little bit of the technical aspects of what I've learned and appreciated?
I think that'd be interesting. I mean, I think, we'd love to hear too. I mean, when I think of being a cinematographer on a feature film, that seems like a huge leap to me from, you know, uh, doing stills and coming up with, when you're starting doing motion projects, and then in a relatively short amount of time, you went from there
Right,
to, I mean, what what does it look like, and what's the difference between cinematography versus, hey, I'm going to make a short film here and try to figure things out from a still
right.
photographer's perspective.
Well, it's a huge learning curve, and I was fortunate, go into the whole project very humble and with a good attitude, and a lot of the people on set were, or most everybody was more experienced in the feature film business than I was, because this was my first feature. But I had the skill set to light it and move the cameras in the ways that they needed to be moved, and that was appreciated by the producers and the directors. But in terms of knowing all the little details, like things that were a huge learning curve for me were when the first AD sends me a one-liner, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't even know what a one-liner is, and I'm looking at it, and it's basically an algebraic formula where every day on the shoot is broken down. So you never shoot any of these films sequentially, or I wouldn't imagine you ever would. But it starts off with prioritizing, first of all, your location. So you might have the first scene in the film is shot at one location, and it might also be the last scene in the film at the same location. You shoot them both while you're there. And then you move on to other locations. For us, we spent 2 weeks at a farm on this film, and there was a lot of time, a lot of downtime when the actors were getting aged. It took place over the course of 20 years, but the formula for this involves, okay, you've got these actors here on these days, you've got to be at this location on these days, you have these props on these days, you have, this has to be a night shot, this is shot in the day. And there's so many different little calculations that are put into it. I have such an appreciation for anybody that can tackle this and think, all right, well, we have 130 scenes in this movie and 20 different locations, and we have this actor for 5 days and this actor for 8 days and this actor throughout, and just to be able to put all that together. And then there's another document called A Day Out of Days, which has every actor, every prop, every vehicle, every piece of wardrobe, every little moving piece that goes into that is a huge calculation. But in terms of the actual cinematography, I think when I first got into it, I started, I would say I kind of lit things very similar to what I would do with still photography. And it's very, very different. Like I've got a little light here lighting me from the front, sort of a, traditional soft portrait type light. And it's very different than what you would do for cinema. It looks, you need a still photograph to be able to read in one frame. And in cinema, you don't. You've got sounds, and you've got That was right on cue. I don't know if you guys heard the the payphone in the background. Um, you've got sounds, and then people move throughout the frame, so there can be a little mystery. And the lighting tends to be done, I think, when it's done most effectively, it's done so that it looks realistic. Rather than just sort of an all telling. And it's gotten so much easier to do with all the different choices available now in terms of like Astera Titan tubes and all the different LEDs and there's so many different tools. The giant 1200 watt LEDs are replacing a lot of the smaller HMIs, and that was a bit of a learning curve in terms of lighting and figuring out how to make the cameras move. I remember watching people online when I was studying cinematography, and some of the big names in the business would talk about the way you make a camera move to convey a certain emotion. And I remember thinking, looking at some of these videos and thinking, well, this guy's really just totally geeking out on all this stuff. It's not, people are talking very romantically about the camera moves, but then it really is something to that. The choice of the lens can even affect what the characters are feeling. There was many times in the film that we shot where we needed to convey emotion, and the director said that he wanted to have a handheld setup. I had a B cam operator and a couple first ACs that were working with us. And most of the time when we're tight in these scenes, anytime I'm handheld, I never want to use more than a 50 millimeter lens, but a lot of the times I'm literally over the shoulder of one of these actors with a 28 millimeter lens just right up next to them. And even though you could fill the frame from a further distance with a longer lens, it's a very different feeling than it is with the wider lens when you're right on top of them. The audience, they might not know the same way that we know that it's a wider lens and closer to them, but they can feel it. And it's just one of the subtleties of filmmaking. And back to the idea of the lighting and making it more realistic looking and maybe less revealing than some of the still photography, like to the high key especially. The idea for me was to light things very realistically, and then that would be the master shot, and then we would come in for coverage. And a lot of times when you come in for your 2 shots and your overs and your tight singles and your mediums, those shots, that's when you start bringing in your pizza boxes and your negative fills and all that to really make the actors and the actresses, to fully feature the nice lighting that you're not going to see in the master. It's okay if it's not perfect portrait lighting in your wides and your masters, but then you come in, and most of the time when you come in for an extreme close-up, you might be right here, and it's way tighter than you would ever be in a still portrait, unless you're shooting for cosmetics or beauty magazines or something. So by the time you come in that tight, you're really working in a completely different realm. I can show you. Let me share my screen here. I can show you a couple examples of master shots that I have on my website. Let's see, share screen. Is everybody able to see this? Okay, so for example, this shot here is in a restaurant that we were in Washington, D.C. Literally got photobombed by Newt Gingrich when we were filming this. This is the master shot that started off. I had walked in with a gimbal and followed a separate couple into the restaurant, and then as they passed, with the camera landed here on this 2 shot. And then we came in for coverage, and I'm shooting an over Elisa back towards Ben, and Newt completely photobombed us in the background. But this is an example of how I like to light things to where it's a little more realistic looking. Obviously the light on them is a little different than the people in the background, but we had a a quasar kino hanging from over top of them, and had a lot of bounce coming in from the white tablecloth, of course. And this is a day for night um, scene. We had to dirty black a lot of the windows in the background. There was a lot of effort on this film to shoot day for night, just because it was so demanding on the crew to be working 10 and sometimes 12-hour days. You know, it's you kill 2 days if you're doing a night shoot. Um, so we were often building tents around windows so that we could put lights outside and project them through the windows rather than just putting a dirty black out there. But you know, that's an example of you know, something that looks believable as restaurant lighting, but at the same time, it's very, very well lit and controlled. There is this scene here was, you know, the director told me, he said, all right, the kitchen is the heart of Galena. I want it to look like there's apple pie on the windowsill, and this is a very romantic, you know, Hallmark type scene. So literally for this, we had an HMI. It's called a Jolico. It's a 1600-watt Joker with a Lico attachment projecting through the window and hazed up the kitchen, and then a skip bounce on the floor to provide some underlighting. But you know, that's an example of, it's not really the greatest lighting necessarily for a photograph or a portrait, but it's, you know, believable lighting. So how am I doing, Mike? Am I getting off track on
I no,
on
I
the?
think this is all. I think this is all very interesting. I mean, something that I'm wondering about as you're talking is how much input are you able to have? You know, in terms of, you know, the director's obviously telling you, okay, this is going to be the scene. This is what's important, and then, you know, you step in to create the image and to make it happen. Uh, do you have a lot of input in saying like, well, this, I don't really think this is working out great. Maybe we ought to be coming at it from this angle. We need to do this, or are you just essentially doing everything you can, you know, at the to try to meet the director's vision, and you're kind of at that person's mercy.
Well, I think that probably varies from project to project and person to person. But my relationship with Joe, the director, he's not really a camera guy. He knows what he wants in terms of the feeling that he's trying to convey, and um, you know, he has opinions like on what I had mentioned earlier about, you know, the immersive handheld feel. But most of the time, he would tell me what he was thinking. We would go over. We would have little 30-minute meetings the night before each shoot day where we would talk about what was coming up the next day and think about the ways in which we would tackle it. And I would often say, this is how I think we should do it, and this is how we need to light it, and we need to go about it this way. Most of the time it was planned in advance, you know, knowing that we were going to have to tent windows or this, that, or the other. But I would say, all right, I think we should come into this with a dolly shot, or this should be steady cam or gimbal or drone or whatever. And then in terms of lighting, that was, you know, completely left up to me. um, you know, he had ideas where, for example, let me find, how do you switch screens? I need to switch to my, maybe I have to stop sharing and I'll share again. Um, there was an office scene here, where he knew that he wanted a circular dolly shot around this guy. You know, that was 100% his call. I thought, you know, maybe we could have gotten it in coverage, but you know, he was very specific about wanting this shot where we did a circular dolly shot around him, and it took quite a bit of doing to make it work. But here's a little behind the scenes shot of that. This office was crazy. We were constantly, I mean, you can see we're right in Washington, D.C. Out, if you look, you can't see it in this shot, but off to the side, you can see the Washington Monument out one window, and then the White House out the other window if you craned your neck just right. But we were constantly fighting reflections in windows. And this was my uniform most of the time. Here, we had the camera on a Dana dolly, and I'm dressed in black and sometimes draped in duvetine and black mask and everything, just to avoid all the reflections that we were constantly battling there. Um, Speaking of Steadicam, I want to just call out the guy, our Steadicam operator here is Martin Whittier. I don't know if you guys know him. He's the former owner of Charm Cine Rentals, and I've rented a lot of equipment from him and bought some equipment from him and hired him to do Steadicam on this job. And tragically, he and Nate Brubaker, another pioneer in the film industry here in Baltimore, were both killed in a car wreck a few weeks ago. Very, very sad situation there. But here's a couple other little behind the scenes shots. Here's a scene after a high school basketball game that we were setting up for, and the pickup truck, the infamous pickup truck that spent more time on a tow truck than actually driving under its own power. There was a lot of scenes where it would get pushed into the frame instead of actually driving. And at one point, we weren't driving this thing at all because it was leaking gasoline. I think it had rust in the tank above a certain level. So if you put more than like 6 or 8 gallons of fuel in it, gasoline would just be pouring out of this thing. But that was the best they could come up with in terms of what they needed specifically for that shoot, or for that truck for the time period. Here's a dolly shot that we had set up at the farm auction. And there's the B cam operator and the dolly grip. What else would you like to touch on, Mike? I could probably just sit here and ramble all day.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's something that I'm curious about is, I mean, every big project definitely has a little bit of a learning curve, and there are things that you pick up, things that you're surprised about, that you're going to take towards the next project. Can you talk a little bit about what those type of moments were for you on this?
On this project specifically, I think the big learning moments were what I touched on a little bit earlier in terms of the organization of it. What a finally, we're dealing with all union talent, all name brand talent, especially the secondary characters were the more large name talent. But what the first AD did to have everything buttoned down, and the process of what a well-oiled machine it was. The smaller productions are easier to figure out, where you're doing 2-day shoots, and it's like, okay, well, let's just figure, everybody's here for the 2 days, let's just figure this out logistically, what makes the most sense. But when you've got a 32 days worth of principal photography that you have to calculate, just trying to think about that and trying to keep the crew motivated. I had 10 people in the camera department, and it can be grueling, and just to make sure everybody's appreciated and that they're doing a bang up job, and keeping people motivated is a huge thing. There's been times on other projects where there's been a lot of different learning moments, and usually from failures. There's too many to count there. But yeah, most of my big learning moments have come from failures.
Sure. Well, how do you think your approach would be different on the next project of this size?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think we actually, knock on wood, there was not any kind of a breakdown on this. Everything went very fluidly. And every project is going to have a different approach. Fortunately for this one, as I mentioned, we had a very long lead-in time to really think about things and really dial it in and really get all the B-roll and everything shot well in advance. We only had to go back after principal photography for a couple of pickup shots with some stand-ins that were riding in convertibles on the Bay Bridge and things like that. But yeah, the pre-production standpoint is going to differ from one project to the next. There's a project that I'm talking about. It's probably not going to start shooting until at least a year from now. But I think we're talking about doing this with XR technology. It's a sci-fi, and XR is basically extended reality, where you have these giant LED walls. It's the way they filmed The Mandalorian. Instead of a green screen, you've got LED walls with the images projected around the actors, and it's a much more immersive experience for the actors to be acting with their environment rather than just some random green screen. And you can bring small props and little pieces of the set into the frame with them. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that and figuring out how that works. Nate, the man who passed recently, is the one who built that studio here in Baltimore. There's really only a few in the Mid-Atlantic. There's a lot in Georgia and New York, but around here, I think that's pretty much the only one. Yeah.
That'll be fascinating to work in that kind of environment for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious on the like the production size on this particular film. What kind of a camera package did you select, and why, and how big of a grip package, like a 10-ton, 20-ton, the crew size. How was all of that figured out going into the project?
Well, a lot of it is stuff that I own. When I first started getting into the biz, I totally geeked out and bought a ton of equipment, and it's just amassed since then. And I now own a 15-foot trailer that I use for smaller productions. It's filled with HMIs and LEDs and C stands and high boys and this, that, and the other. And I own 3 Red cameras, and we used Red cameras on this project, just because I could give it to them at a discounted rate. The Indy, that's something that I should probably bring up here. This is not something that you want to do to get rich. The indie feature, or indie world especially, if you're making bang up bucks, licensing still photographs to big commercial clients, that's the way to go to make some money. I think even in Hollywood, most of your DPs are probably, everybody's a work for hire, which is such a toxic word, to an organization like the APA. But you're essentially an employee of the production company, and it's all work for hire. And in the indie world, your rates are going to be even lower, just because the budget for the film is lower than a studio film is going to be. So for that reason alone, I'm like, hey, if I'm going to be able to afford to do this project, we have to rent my equipment. Not that there's anything wrong with Red equipment, but Red tends to be more of a commercial camera in terms, like a television commercial package, and Arri seems to own the motion picture industry. I now own an Arri, so because I just geek out that way. But that's why we ended up going with my camera package, and we had a 5-ton grip truck in addition to that. I think the largest light we had was probably a 12K HMI that we used twice. But with the camera packages and everything the way they are, like the one Red that I use is a dual ISO camera, and it goes up to 3200 ISO, and I'm shooting with prime lenses that sometimes at a T2 or even wider if necessary. So you can get by with a lot of 18K lights are not cheap. They're budget killers. And I think in the indie world especially, you're better off investing your money in the actors and your set design, your production designer, and going with I used Rokinon Zine lenses that you can buy brand new for, used to be 2,500, might be less than that now. We weren't shooting on Arri master primes that are $26,000 per lens. And I don't think your average viewer is ever going to notice the difference on a film like this. It's a very esoteric quality. So at least in my opinion, I think that if you're going to spend the money, if you have a limited budget, you're better off having beautiful sets that are shot with a cheaper lens than having a fantastic lens shooting a plain white wall. So these are considerations that you think about when you're in the indie world. Studio films are completely different. It doesn't matter how much you spend. It's when you got that kind of money, you're using the best for everything. But yeah, we had a 5-ton and then my camera and grip equipment. So
Actually, that makes a lot of sense. It's yeah, I didn't realize that indie film perspective and approach, because I mean, as a somewhat layperson for for film cinematography, it looks great to me. So I've definitely, I think it
thank
looks
you.
awesome. I did have a question here from Rob Sharit. Says, do you think your stills background and crew management skills were a strong assist or help to how you interacted with and managed the camera department?
For sure. I don't know that just shooting stills specifically helped me with that, but having done that and worked, with crew, when you're a photographer, you tend to be the producer and the director and the camera operator, so rather than just coming up through the ranks as a PA and a second AC, first AC, and a camera operator, and then becoming a DP, you're you're sort of spearheading the whole project as a still photographer. You kind of you can sometimes be the producer and the director and the camera operator. So yeah, for sure, being able to talk to the talent. As a DP, you don't talk to the talent a whole lot, except for when you tell them to, hey, I need you to move a little over here. Show me what you're going to do so I can come around with you this way. You're not directing the talent as a DP. But for sure, it helped me to be able to talk to the crew and keep them, motivated, and you're in more of a authoritarian position there, and just being able to keep everybody happy is often the difference between success and failure. Joe, who was the director on this, is a natural born leader, and everybody just rallied around him and the story immediately, and wanted to, give it their very best, and because he is such a nice guy.
Great. Well, I know we're 30 minutes in here. I think maybe we want to open it up if anybody has questions. I think we could go ahead and maybe unmute folks if anybody had any questions for Clark.
I'll ask one because I'm not a big video or moving picture person, and one of the big differences for me between stills and videos is if I don't like a still, I'll shoot a second one, and you kind of lock things down and be committed. So how do you avoid laying awake at night wishing you'd done it differently?
Well, you're always going to think about things and think, well, how could I have done that different? But that's kind of the beauty of editing. And if for some reason your master shot doesn't work, maybe that's not the shot in the scene that you start with. Maybe that's not your establishing shot or your transition shot. But you kind of want to figure out different ways to come into it, and then different ways to cover the scene. But with the one thing I noticed is that with stills, I would always tend to shoot, or I still shoot a lot of stills, but you tend to want to get that perfect shot. They're the perfect composition where this is, this piece of the background is here and this is here. For me, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, because the actors are moving and they're talking sometimes, and the shot evolves a little bit. So if you don't nail the position exactly, you can do another take. And sometimes there are certain scenes that are more crucial than others. They're the ones that keep me up the most at night are the drone shots. You know, where, like, for example, we had to get a shot of our hero driving across the Bay Bridge, and it took a lot of work to get permission from the Port Authority police to let us onto their little working pier to launch the drone from. But then when he drives across the bridge, I don't know, is it 6 miles across this thing or something? You know, you get a take, and then he's got to turn around and come back. You know, it's 25 minutes between takes. So those are the ones that stress me out the most. You know, trying to get them just right. But as far as you know, getting the perfect framing, I think for me, it's not as crucial to have all the elements in place at the exact same time in a video as it is with stills, because it is sort of an evolving, you know, with talent anyway, with the actors moving throughout the scene, it seems to be a little more forgiving, and you're not just staring at a single frame, you're watching it move. I don't know if that's answered your question or not.
And then we've got a question in the chat here from Sam. He says, I know you'd mentioned that the specific director that you worked with wasn't particularly visual, but how did you go about designing a consistent look and series of quote unquote rules for how you'd shoot during pre-production, and how did that figure into the budget planning?
So there's a point in the movie where it comes into Washington, D.C., and of course it would be so awesome if we could fly drones in Washington, D.C., and he has grandiose ideas. He's like, okay, we need the techno crane and we need this and that, and it's just not in the budget. So there were plenty of times when you had to compromise. But the visual language of this film was, pretty traditional. We had hired a colorist to finish the film after editing, prior to commencement of principal photography. So we actually worked with the colorist to come up with a rough idea. He created some LUTs that we, loaded into the cameras and applied those looks so that you could see them. We had many monitors on set. That was one of the things with COVID. They didn't want a whole bunch of people huddled around the monitors, so we had a pretty massive video village. We would apply these LUTs in camera so that Galena had a very different feel that actually evolved a little bit. It started off pretty warm and fuzzy, but over time it changed a little bit, and it was all very subtle changes. And Washington, D.C. was the same way. When he first goes there, it's a different feel than when the glitz and the glamour kind of wears off a little bit. It tends to have more of a colder feel to it. So the look of the film in terms of the coloring was definitely established in advance. In terms of camera moves and lensing, that was often done more on a practical standpoint. We would try and add a little drama to any of our transition shots. There were several transition shots that we had planned in advance where we would say, okay, well, we're going to do a screen wipe with this and cut straight into a dolly shot where it goes with this actor as they go over to the table, or this, that, or the other. But a lot of times the moves were or the angles were done more practically than planned in advance.
Yeah, very interesting. And then you also mentioned filming this during COVID. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that presented?
Well, serendipitously, we were very lucky that nobody came down with COVID. We were in a little bit of a bubble out there. They had found a Methodist retreat center called Pacomath near Church Hill, where we rented the whole place. And it was kind of like being at summer camp. The cast and crew were all in this church camp out there, and there was anybody that's in Zone A, which would be anybody that's with the unmasked actors, myself, the director, any other camera operators, the actors themselves. We were being tested twice a week. Everybody else was being tested once a week. So yeah, we didn't have any rain delays or COVID delays, very luckily. But that was sadly, that was about $200,000. You know, when you've got limited funds, we spent over $200,000 just on COVID, you know, in terms of PPE and testing. And uh, even the food was more expensive because of COVID. You know, traditionally on a film set, you're going to have a caterer come in with catering type options where you've got, you know, platters and people serve themselves, or you'll have somebody serve you. But everything during COVID, according to you know, the union rules from SAG, you've got to have individually wrapped stuff, and you know, that's $200,000 worth of your budget that you'll never see on the screen. It didn't go to enhance anything. It was just specifically for COVID.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, wow, that's yeah, that's a lot to take in thinking about that.
right.
Um, is there does anybody else have any questions? I know we've been on here now for past our 30 minutes quite a bit. But we just wanted to give another opportunity if anybody had any questions for Clark. Okay.
I like your camera collection in the background.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the museum.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I think Rob Street here has got a question here. He's typing into the chat. Yeah, you can't be a photographer without a bunch of museum pieces behind
Great.
you. I've been doing it long enough that some of them I actually used to use. All right. So Rob's got a question here. He says Clark, what's your takeaway and your takeaway lessons from this project?
Um, well, honestly, I had the time of my career doing this. It was just so much fun. And, you know, of course, I've got a family and kids in college and all that. And I have to continue making a living, and I'm going to continue, you know, stills was my first passion and I still love making stills. But, you know, at some point, we all have to make ourselves happy. And you know, just I continue to love to do the little passion projects. And I'm trying to dream up a little project right now that I want to shoot for Halloween, and it's just going to be something I do for the heck of it and get it out there. And that's the kind of stuff that makes me happy. So even though this isn't, you know, I don't want to give you the wrong impression, you can certainly make a living doing this, but it's not as lucrative as getting paid $8 or $10,000 a day to license, you know, some images to Coca-Cola or whoever. But yeah, I think it's kind of a life lesson that was in the film itself, that our main character explored was, you got to do what makes you happy, and I love doing this. So that was kind of my, if I had a big takeaway from doing this project, that was it. I found a lot of joy in doing it that I hadn't felt about work in a while.
That's a very nice way to wrap it up in a very tidy way with the reference to the film's message. So yeah, excellent. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing uh,
Well,
about your experience of making a looks like an amazing film. So yeah,
well,
thank you very
thanks.
much. All
Yeah,
right.
check it out if you can. It's on demand for a little while longer, probably another month. But yeah, thanks for having me. It was a privilege to get to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So thanks everyone for joining us.